The autumn wind howled across the Wyoming prairie like a wounded beast, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Dust devils danced between the weathered buildings of Redemption Creek, a town that had seen better days but refused to die. The year was 1887, and the West was changing, though some traditions died harder than others. Jacob Harlow stood at the window of the Silver Dollar Saloon, watching tumbleweeds race down the main street. At 35, he was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, owner of the sprawling Double H ranch that stretched for miles beyond the town limits. His dark eyes, hard as obsidian, surveyed the gathering crowd outside with the same calculating gaze he used when appraising cattle. The autumn auction was about to begin. "Another whiskey, Mr. Harlow." The bartender's voice barely registered above the raucous laughter filling the saloon. Jacob nodded without turning. The amber liquid burned its familiar path down his throat as he contemplated the spectacle about to unfold. The widow auction, a cruel necessity born of desperation in a land that showed no mercy to women without men. Every fall, those who couldn't survive the coming winter alone would stand on that makeshift platform, hoping someone would take them in. For whatever purpose. "Barbaric practice," muttered Tom Brennan, Jacob's foreman, who had just entered the saloon. The older man's weathered face showed his distaste. "Survival often is," Jacob replied, his voice carrying no emotion. He'd learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. The crowd outside grew larger, men from neighboring ranches and towns converging like vultures. Some came out of genuine need for household help, others for baser reasons. Jacob had never participated. He had no need. His ranch ran like clockwork, and he preferred his solitude. "They say there's a new one this year." Buck Watson's voice cut through the din. Jacob's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Watson owned the neighboring Triple W ranch and had been a thorn in Jacob's side for years. The man swaggered over, his expensive clothes unable to mask the crude nature beneath. "A real mystery woman. Arrived on the stage last week. Keeps to herself." "Since when do you need another woman?" Buck, one of his cronies, laughed. "You've already got 3 working your place." "A man can never have too much of a good thing," Watson replied, his smile predatory. "Besides, I hear this one's different. Won't show her face. Dresses all in black like she's still in mourning." Jacob's interest flickered despite himself. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, a mystery was rare currency. The auctioneer's bell rang, and the crowd began moving outside. Jacob followed at a distance, positioning himself where he could observe without seeming to participate. The platform had been erected in front of the general store, rough planks that had seen too many desperate souls. The first few women were familiar faces: Sarah Mills, whose husband had died in a mine collapse; Mary Patterson, abandoned with 3 children when her husband went searching for gold and never returned. They went quickly, to ranchers Jacob knew would treat them fairly. Then she appeared. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the woman in black stepped onto the platform. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in this rough town, her entire figure shrouded in mourning clothes. A heavy veil obscured her face completely, and she kept her gloved hands clasped in front of her, even from his distance. Jacob could sense the pride in her bearing, back straight, chin lifted. This was no broken woman begging for charity. "Well, well," Watson's voice carried across the crowd. "What have we here?" The auctioneer, clearly uncomfortable with the woman's appearance, stammered through his introduction. "This here is, Mrs. Clara Thornton, widow. Come from back east. She's educated, can read and write, knows her numbers." "What else can she do?" someone shouted, earning crude laughter from the crowd. The woman, Clara, remained motionless, as if the words couldn't touch her. There was something in her stillness that commanded attention, a dignity that made the leering men seem small. "Let's start the bidding at $20, the auctioneer called. "25, came a voice from the crowd. 30. Jacob watched the woman's hands. They remained perfectly still, but he caught the slight tension in her shoulders. Whatever had brought her to this moment, it hadn't broken her spirit. $50, Watson called out, pushing through the crowd to get a better view. His eyes glittered with an interest that made Jacob's skin crawl. 75, another rancher countered. Watson laughed. $100. And that's generous for a woman who won't even show her face. Could be hiding anything under there. The crowd murmured. It was a substantial sum, more than most would pay for an unknown quantity. Jacob found himself studying the woman more intently. There was something about her, perhaps the way she held herself, or the subtle defiance in her posture, that stirred something he'd thought long dead. He'd built his fortune on reading people, and every instinct told him there was more to Clara Thornton than mourning clothes and mystery. Watson was already moving toward the platform, confident in his victory, when Jacob heard his own voice cutting through the air. $200. The crowd turned as one. Jacob Harlow never bid at these auctions. Watson's face flushed red. Well, Jacob Harlow finally found something that interests him. Watson sneered. 250. 300. Jacob's voice was calm, almost bored. Watson's eyes narrowed. The bidding had already far exceeded any reasonable amount, but backing down now would be a public defeat, and both men knew it. You really want her that bad, Harlow? Watson's voice carried a dangerous edge. Or is this just about showing me up? Jacob stepped forward, the crowd parting before him. Everything isn't about you, Buck. 300 stands. For a moment, it seemed Watson might continue, but something in Jacob's expression made him reconsider. Instead, a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Tell you what, Harlow, you can have her, but I'll make you a side wager, just between gentlemen. His voice dropped, but still carried to those nearby. $300 says you can't bet her before sunrise? A man pays that much. He ought to get his money's worth. Don't you think? The crowd held its breath. Such propositions weren't uncommon in the rough world of Redemption Creek. But this was Jacob Harlow, a man who kept himself apart from such crude displays. Jacob felt the weight of eyes upon him. To refuse would invite mockery, suggest weakness. In this world, reputation was currency, and he'd spent years building his gaze flicked to the woman on the platform. She'd gone very still, and he could almost feel her listening, waiting. You're on, he heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. Watson's grin widened. Boys, you heard him. Jacob Harlow's finally going to find out what he's been missing all these years alone on that ranch. The auctioneer, eager to be done with the uncomfortable situation, quickly finalized the sale. Jacob approached the platform, pulling out his leather wallet. He paid the auctioneer without looking at Clara, then turned to her. Ma'am, he said quietly, extending his hand to help her down. She hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. Through the fabric, he felt her fingers trembling, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. But her voice, when she spoke, was steady and cultured, confirming her Eastern origins. Mr. Harlow. Just 2 words, but they carried weight. Not gratitude, not fear, just acknowledgement. Jacob found himself oddly relieved. The walk to his wagon felt like miles with the eyes of the town upon them, behind them. Watson's laughter rang out, already beginning the tale that would be all over the territory by nightfall. Jacob Harlow, the untouchable rancher, had finally fallen to temptation, and Watson would collect either way, $300 or Jacob's humiliation. As he helped Clara into the wagon, she spoke again, so quietly only he could hear. I hope you got what you paid for, Mr. Harlow. The words stung more than they should have. Jacob climbed up beside her and took the reins, urging the horses forward. As Redemption Creek fell away behind them and the vast prairie opened before them, he wondered what he'd truly purchased. and what it would cost them both before the sun rose again. The Double H Ranch sprawled beneath the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their ancient song. It would be a long night in Wyoming territory, where the autumn wind carried secrets and the prairie grass whispered of things better left unspoken. The wagon wheels creaked in rhythm with the horses' steady gait as they traveled the dusty trail toward the Double H Ranch. The setting sun painted the Wyoming sky in violent shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the prairie grass that bent and swayed like an endless ocean. Jacob kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, acutely aware of the silent figure beside him. Clara Thornton had not spoken since they'd left Redemption Creek. She sat with perfect posture, her black-gloved hands folded in her lap, the heavy veil still concealing her features entirely. The only movement came from the gentle sway of the wagon and the occasional flutter of her dress in the evening wind. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of what had transpired at the auction. Jacob found himself stealing glances at his mysterious passenger, trying to discern something, anything, about the woman who had stood so proudly on that platform while being sold like livestock. "The ranch is just over that rise," he finally said, his voice rougher than intended. "Another 10 minutes. She turned her head slightly toward him, and though he couldn't see her eyes, he felt their weight. "A house is not always a home, Mr. Harlow?" The words struck him with unexpected force. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a quiet statement of fact that suggested she spoke from experience. Jacob wondered what home she had lost, what circumstances had driven her to that platform in Redemption Creek. As they crested the hill, the Double H Ranch spread before them in the dying light. The main house stood like a fortress against the wilderness, 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it, the barns and outbuildings formed a small village unto themselves, and in the distance, his cattle dotted the landscape like scattered seeds. "It's substantial," Clara observed, the first hint of surprise coloring her voice. "I've worked hard for what I have," Jacob replied, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. The Double H was his life's work, built from nothing through years of sweat and sacrifice. The ranch hands paused in their evening chores to watch as the wagon approached. Jacob saw the curiosity in their faces, the quick exchanges of glances. By now, Tom Brennan would have heard about the auction, about the wager. The foreman stood on the porch, his expression carefully neutral. Jacob brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He climbed down and moved to assist Clara, but she was already gathering her skirts, preparing to descend on her own. He offered his hand anyway, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted it. "Tom, this is Mrs. Thornton," Jacob said as they climbed the porch steps. "She'll be staying with us. Please have Maria prepare the blue room." Tom's weathered face showed no surprise, though Jacob knew the man had questions. The blue room was the finest guest quarters in the house, usually reserved for the rare, important visitor. "Yes, sir. Maria's got supper ready whenever you're wanting it." Mrs. Thornton. Jacob turned to Clara. "Would you care to dine, or would you prefer to rest first?" She paused, one hand rising to touch her veil briefly. "I would be grateful to retire, if you don't mind. It's been a trying day." "Of course." Jacob felt an unexpected stab of something, disappointment, relief. He couldn't tell. "Tom will show you to your room. If you need anything, Maria, our housekeeper, will assist you." She inclined her head slightly. "Thank you. Mr. Harlow, you've been most accommodating." There was something in the way she said it that made Jacob wonder if she knew about the wager. But surely she couldn't have heard Watson's crude proposition from the platform. Unless... Tom led her inside, and Jacob remained on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight bleed from the sky, the familiar sounds of evening on the ranch horses being stabled, The distant lowing of cattle, the bark of a dog, failed to bring their usual comfort. Instead, his mind kept returning to Watson's mocking laughter, the weight of the wager he'd foolishly accepted. $300 if he didn't bet her by sunrise. His reputation as a man who kept his word against Watson's certainty that he would fail. And caught between them, a woman who deserved better than to be a pawn in their game. Jacob entered the house and made his way to his study, where he poured himself a generous measure of bourbon. The amber liquid caught the lamplight as he held it up, reminding him of other nights, other choices that had shaped the man he'd become. He'd built his fortune by being ruthless when necessary, by never showing weakness. But tonight, that strength felt more like a cage. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Maria, his Mexican housekeeper who'd been with him since the early days, entered with a tray. "You missed supper, Senor Jacob." "Not hungry, Maria." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me, what do you think of our guest?" Maria's dark eyes held wisdom earned through years of watching the world with quiet perception. "She is very sad, I think, and very proud. She thanked me for preparing the room, very proper, very polite, but she would not let me help with her veil or gloves." "Did she say anything else?" "Only to ask if there was a lock on the door." Maria's expression grew troubled. "I told her yes, and showed her how to use it. Senor Jacob, this woman, she is not like the others from the auction." No, Jacob thought. She certainly wasn't. The others had been broken by circumstance, worn down by the harsh realities of frontier life. But Clara Thornton carried her tragedy like armor, her grief like a weapon. After Maria left, Jacob tried to focus on the ranch ledgers spread across his desk, but the numbers swam before his eyes. His thoughts kept drifting upstairs to the blue room, to the woman behind the locked door. What was she thinking? What had driven her to Redemption Creek? To stand on that platform with such dignity while men bid on her future. The clock on the mantel chimed 11. 5 hours until sunrise. 5 hours until he would have to face Watson with either victory or defeat. The thought of either outcome turned his stomach. Unable to concentrate, Jacob abandoned his desk and walked out onto the porch. The night air was sharp with the promise of frost, and overhead, the stars blazed with indifferent beauty. He'd stood here countless nights, master of all he surveyed, content in his solitude. Now that solitude felt different, disrupted by the presence of a stranger in his house. A movement caught his eye. A figure in black stood at the far end of the porch, so still she might have been a shadow. Clara had emerged from her room, though she still wore her veil and gloves despite the darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "I rarely do," she replied. "The night and I have become well acquainted." Jacob moved closer, maintaining a respectful distance. The prairie can be unsettling if you're not used to it. All that emptiness. Emptiness can be a comfort. Mr. Harlow, it asked nothing of you. They stood in companionable silence for a while, two solitary figures against the vast darkness. Finally, Clara spoke again. "Your housekeeper, Maria. She's very kind. She's been with me for 12 years, since I was just starting out with nothing but ambition and a few head of cattle. And now you have all this." She gestured to the sprawling ranch. "You must be very proud." "Pride's a dangerous thing," Jacob said, thinking of the wager, of his inability to back down from Watson's challenge. "It can make a man do foolish things." Clara turned toward him, and even through the veil, he sensed her studying him. "Yes," she said softly. "It can." Something in her tone made him wonder again what she knew, what she'd overheard. But before he could respond, she was moving toward the door. "Good night, Mr. Harlow. Thank you for giving me a place to stay." "Mrs. Thornton," he called as she reached the door. She paused. "Whatever brought you to Redemption Creek, whatever you're running from, you're safe here. I give you my word." She stood frozen for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. In my experience, Mr. Harlow, safety is as much an illusion as home, but I appreciate the sentiment. Then she was gone, leaving Jacob alone with the night and the weight of promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to mock the pretensions of men who thought they could control fate with money and pride. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human concerns, and Jacob Harlow stood watching them, wondering how a simple auction had become so complicated, and why the opinion of a woman he'd just met suddenly mattered more than $300, or Buck Watson's scorn. Dawn broke across the Wyoming prairie in shades of amber and rose, painting the frost-covered grass with ethereal light. The Double H Ranch stirred to life with the familiar sounds of a working cattle operation. The lowing of steers, the clatter of hooves, the calls of cowboys preparing for another day's labor. But Jacob Harlow stood transfixed at his bedroom window, watching a solitary figure in the garden below. Clara Thornton moved through the morning mist like a specter, her black dress a stark contrast against the silvered landscape. She stood perfectly still among Maria's carefully tended herbs and vegetables. Face turned toward the rising sun, though the heavy veil still concealed her features. There was something in her posture, a quality of waiting, or perhaps listening, that made Jacob reluctant to disturb her solitude. He'd barely slept, haunted by thoughts of Watson's wager and the sunrise deadline that had now passed. $300 would change hands. His reputation would take a blow. But somehow that seemed insignificant compared to the mystery of the woman in his garden. A knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. Tom Brennan entered, his expression grave. "Morning, boss. Thought you should know. Buck Watson's already spreading word around town. Says you couldn't seal the deal, that the widow's too high and mighty for even the great Jacob Harlow." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Let him talk." "There's more." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "He's saying things about Mrs. Thornton. Ugly things. Speculation about what she's hiding under that veil. Why she really came to Redemption Creek." "What kind of speculation?" "The kind that ain't fit to repeat, but folks are listening. Jacob, you know how this town loves its gossip." Jacob turned from the window, his face hardening into the mask that had served him well in countless business dealings. "Saddle my horse. I have business in town." "You sure that's wise? Watson's got his whole crew with him? And they've been drinking since dawn, celebrating his win." "I said saddle my horse, Tom." As his foreman left, Jacob dressed quickly and headed downstairs. He found Clara in the kitchen with Maria, sitting at the worn wooden table with a cup of tea. She'd removed her gloves to wrap her fingers around the warm ceramic, and Jacob noticed her hands were elegant but marked with small scars, as if she'd known physical labor. "Mr. Harlow," she acknowledged without turning. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough." He poured himself coffee, black and bitter. "I'll be riding into town this morning. Is there anything you need?" "Nothing, thank you." She paused, then added quietly, "I heard horses leaving before dawn, riders in a hurry." So she knew. Somehow, she knew about the wager, about his failure to collect. Jacob felt heat rise in his face. "Mrs. Thornton." "Please." She held up one scarred hand. "Whatever business you had with Mr. Watson is between you and him. I'm grateful for your restraint, if not for the circumstances that brought me here." Before Jacob could respond, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. Through the window, he saw 3 riders approaching fast. Tom Brennan rushed in, rifle in hand. "Boss, we got company. It's Charlie Morrison from town, and he looks spooked." Jacob stepped onto the porch as the riders pulled up. Charlie, who ran the general store, was indeed pale beneath his weathered tan. "Jacob, thank God you're here. There's been trouble in town. Buck Watson's been shooting his mouth off, getting folks riled up. He's saying..." Charlie's eyes flicked toward the house, where Clara's silhouette was visible in the doorway. "He's saying terrible things about your guest. Claims she's hiding something dark, that no decent woman would conceal her face like that." And Jacob's voice was dangerously quiet. "And some of the rougher elements are taking him seriously. There's talk of riding out here, demanding she show herself, prove she's not, well, not what Watson's suggesting. Which is," Charlie swallowed hard, "that she's diseased, or worse, that she might be wanted by the law, hiding her identity. Buck's got folks convinced she's a danger to the town." Behind him, Jacob heard Clara's sharp intake of breath. When he turned, she stood rigid in the doorway, one hand pressed to her throat. "How many?" Jacob asked. "Maybe a dozen, mostly Watson's crew and some drifters looking for trouble. Sheriff's trying to calm things down, but you know how he is when Buck's involved." Everyone knew Sheriff Daniels owed his position to Watson's influence. The law in Redemption Creek was flexible when it came to the wealthy ranchers' interests. "Tell the sheriff I'll handle this myself," Jacob said. "And Charlie, anyone sets foot on my land looking for trouble, they'll find it." After the riders left, Jacob turned to find Clara still standing in the doorway, trembling slightly despite her rigid posture. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "it would be better if I left. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You'll do no such thing." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "This is my land, my house. Nobody tells me who can stay here." "Your pride again, Mr. Harlow." Her voice held a bitter edge. "How much will it cost you this time?" The question stung because it held truth. But looking at her, this woman who maintained her dignity despite being sold, speculated about, threatened, Jacob felt something deeper than pride. "Some things are worth the cost," he said quietly. She studied him through her veil for a long moment. "You're not what I expected from a man who would make such a wager." "You heard." "I hear many things, Mr. Harlow. When you're invisible, people speak freely." She moved past him toward the garden. "I've been invisible for a long time now." Jacob followed her outside, where the morning sun had burned away the mist. "Why do you hide your face?" She stopped among Maria's marigolds, fingers brushing the bright blooms. "Why do you hide your heart?" "I don't you?" She turned to face him. "You've built this fortress of a ranch, surrounded yourself with employees instead of friends, kept the world at arm's length. We all have our veils. Mr. Harlow, mine is simply more obvious." The truth of her words silenced him. They stood among the flowers, two damaged souls recognizing something kindred in each other. Finally, Clara spoke again. "What will you do about Watson and his mob?" "Whatever I have to. Violence begets violence. I have seen enough of that to last a lifetime." "Then what would you have me do? Let them come here, terrorize you?" She was quiet for so long, Jacob thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice carried a weight of sorrow that made his chest tight. "I would have you be the man you were last night, the one who gave his word that I was safe here. That man wouldn't need violence to prove his point." Before Jacob could respond, Tom Brennan came running. "Boss riders coming, a lot of them. Looks like Watson decided not to wait." Jacob's hand went to his gun, but Clara caught his arm. Through her glove. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please," she said, "no bloodshed on my account. I've seen too much already." Looking into her veiled face, Jacob made a decision that went against every instinct honed by years of frontier survival. He removed his gun belt and handed it to Tom. "Tell the men to stand down. No weapons unless I give the word." Tom's eyes widened. "Jacob, that's an order. Tom!" As the dust cloud of approaching riders grew larger, Jacob stood unarmed on his own land, a woman in mourning at his side. He thought of all the times he'd faced down threats with force, all the victories won through strength and intimidation. But Clara was right. Some veils were worth maintaining. And some battles were better won with dignity than bullets. As Buck Watson and his mob thundered toward the Double H Ranch, Jacob Harlow prepared to face them with nothing but words and will, while beside him, a mysterious widow stood ready to confront whatever came next. The morning sun climbed higher, casting short shadows across the garden where two unlikely allies waited for the storm to break. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its morning song, indifferent to the human drama about to unfold, while the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of frost and flowers and the promise of change. The night fell heavy over the Double H Ranch, bringing with it a silence that seemed to press against the windows like a living thing. Jacob sat in his study, the events of the day weighing on his mind. Watson and his mob had retreated after a tense confrontation, but their ugly words still echoed in the air. The threats against Clara had been vicious, the speculation about what she hid beneath her veil growing wilder with each passing hour. He'd managed to avoid violence, but at what cost Watson had collected his $300 with a smirk that promised this wasn't over. The man's parting words still burned. "You can't protect her forever, Harlow. Sooner or later, we'll all see what kind of monster you're harboring." A soft knock interrupted his brooding. He looked up, expecting Tom or Maria, but the door opened to reveal Clara herself. She stood in the doorway like a shadow given form, still dressed in her morning clothes despite the late hour. "May I come in?" Her voice was steady, but he detected an undercurrent of determination that hadn't been there before. Of course. Jacob rose from his chair, gesturing to the seat across from his desk. "Can I offer you something brandy, perhaps?" "No." She moved into the room with that peculiar grace he'd noticed before. But instead of sitting, she stood before his desk, hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Harlow, I've come to settle our business." "There's no business between us, Mrs. Thornton." "Isn't there?" She tilted her head slightly. "You lost $300 today because of me. Your reputation has been damaged. Your ranch has been threatened. All because of a wager you made on my virtue." Jacob felt heat rise in his face. "I've apologized for that. It was wrong of me." "I'm not seeking apologies." Her voice cut through his words like a blade. "I'm seeking resolution." Before he could respond, she reached up with steady hands and began removing the pins that held her veil in place, one by one. They fell to his desk with tiny, metallic sounds that seemed enormous in the quiet room. "Mrs. Thornton, you don't have to—" "Yes," she said firmly. "I do." The veil lifted away like a dark cloud, and Jacob found himself looking at a face that made his breath catch not with horror, but with the tragic beauty of survival written in scars. The left side of Clara's face bore the marks of fire, a web of healed burns that traced from her temple down to her jaw. But it was her eyes that held him deep green, filled with pain and defiance in equal measure. "Now you see," she said, her chin lifting with that pride he'd sensed from the beginning. "The monster Buck Watson spoke of. You're no monster." The words came out rougher than intended. "Am I not?" She moved closer to the lamp, ensuring he could see every mark clearly. "Shall I tell you how I came by these scars? Mr. Harlow, shall I speak of the fire that took everything from me?" Jacob remained silent, sensing she needed to tell this story as much as he needed to hear it. 2 years ago, I had a different life. A husband who loved me. A son who laughed like sunshine itself. Her voice trembled slightly but didn't break. We had a small farm in Kansas. Nothing grand, but it was ours. Then came a dry summer and a neighbor's carelessly tended fire. The wind carried the sparks to our barn, then our house. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Thomas, my husband, got me out first. Went back for our son, little James, only 5 years old. Her hands gripped the windowsill. The roof collapsed before they could escape. I tried to go back in, fought the neighbors who held me. That's when the burning timber fell. Jacob rose from his chair, drawn by the raw pain in her voice. "I survived," Clara continued, turning back to face him. "If you can call it surviving. For months. I wished I hadn't, but death, it seems, wasn't done with me yet. So I endured, sold the land, used the money for doctors who could do little but ensure the scars healed cleanly. When the money ran out and winter approached, I had two choices: starve with dignity or live with shame." "There's no shame in survival." "Isn't there?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "Tell that to the good people of Redemption Creek. Tell that to Buck Watson and his mob." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "But I'm tired of hiding. Mr. Harlow, if you're to lose money and reputation for harboring me, you should at least know what you're paying for." She reached for the buttons of her high collar, and Jacob realized with a start what she intended. "Clara, Mrs. Thornton, stop! Isn't this what you wagered on?" Her fingers continued their work with mechanical precision. "Your right to bed the mysterious widow? Well, here I am. Collect your due." "Stop!" He caught her hands, stilling their movement. "This isn't what I want." "What do you want, then?" Her eyes blazed with a fury born of pain. "To be the noble protector to save the poor, scarred widow. I don't need your pity. Mr. Harlow, I'm not offering pity." "Then what?" She wrenched her hands free, stepping back. "What possible reason could you have for defending me against Watson, for losing money and facing ridicule, if not pity or desire for what you paid for?" Jacob struggled to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. "Maybe because I recognize someone else who's built walls to keep the world out. Maybe because I see strength where others see only scars." Pretty words. But some of the fire had left her eyes. "Truth." He moved toward her slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. "You asked why I hide my heart. You're right, I do. Have for years. Since I learned that caring for anything in this harsh land is asking for it to be taken away. But when I saw you on that platform, refusing to bow despite everything," he shook his head. "I saw someone who understood that. Someone who'd survived worse than anything this frontier could dish out." Clara studied him for a long moment, then slowly began refastening her buttons. "So, what happens now? Mr. Harlow Dawn has come and gone. You've lost your wager. Watson will make our lives miserable. Why should I stay?" "Because this is your home now, if you want it." "Home." She said the word like it was foreign. "I told you, homes are illusions." "Maybe, but sometimes illusions are all we have." Jacob returned to his desk, pulling out a piece of paper. "I'm drawing up a contract. You'll be the official school teacher for the ranch children. Room, board, and fair wages. No charity. No obligation beyond teaching letters and numbers to Cowboy's kids who need education." She watched him write, her scarred face cycling through emotions too complex to name. "Why?" "Because everyone needs a purpose. And because—" He looked up, meeting her eyes squarely. "Because I'd like to know the woman behind the scars. Not as a conquest or a charity case, but as a friend. Perhaps, if that's not too presumptuous." Clara was quiet for so long he thought she might simply leave. Then, slowly, she sank into the chair across from him. "Friends," she repeated softly. "It's been a long time since I had one of those." "For me as well." They sat in comfortable silence as he finished the contract. When he handed it to her, she read it carefully, then looked up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, small and tentative, but real. "You realize Watson won't let this go. He'll make trouble for both of us." "Let him try." Jacob's voice hardened. "This is my land, my rules, and you're under my protection now, not as property or conquest, but as a member of this ranch." Clara signed the contract with a steady hand, then rose to leave. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Harlow, thank you, not for the job or the protection, but for For seeing me, not the scars, not the tragedy, but me. After she left, Jacob sat alone in his study, staring at her signature on the contract. Outside, coyotes howled their ancient songs, and the wind rattled the windows like searching fingers. He'd lost $300 and gained an enemy in Watson, but somehow he felt he'd won something far more valuable. In the morning, he'd face whatever Watson threw at them, but tonight, for the first time in years, Jacob Harlow didn't feel quite so alone in his fortress. And somewhere upstairs, a scarred widow prepared to face the world without her veil, protected not by pity or obligation, but by something rarer in the harsh Wyoming territory, genuine human understanding. The lamp cast dancing shadows across the study walls as Clara stood before Jacob, her face finally revealed. The scars that traced the left side of her face seemed to shimmer in the flickering light, telling their own story of loss and survival. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of her revelation hanging between them like a physical presence. Jacob found himself unable to look away, not from horror but from a strange sense of recognition. Here was someone who wore her wounds openly, while his remained hidden beneath years of carefully constructed walls. His hand moved almost without thought, reaching toward her face, then stopping inches away. "May I?" he asked quietly. Clara's breath caught, but she nodded, closing her eyes as his fingertips gently traced the raised ridges of scar tissue. His touch was feather-light, reverent rather than pitying. And she shivered not from fear or revulsion, but from the unexpected tenderness of it. "They're not so terrible," he said softly. "They're proof of survival, of strength." Her eyes opened, meeting his with an intensity that made his heart stutter. Pretty words from a man who just lost $300 because of them. Money means nothing compared to truth. His hand moved to cup her unmarred cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And the truth is, Clara Thornton, you're the bravest soul I've ever encountered." "Brave." Her laugh was broken glass. "I hid behind a veil for 2 years. I sold myself at auction rather than face the world openly. You survived. You endured. And tonight, you chose to show me who you really are. That takes more courage than any gunfight or range war." Clara leaned into his touch for just a moment before stepping back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Watson will destroy you for this, for harboring someone like me, for losing that wager, your reputation. Let him try." Jacob's voice hardened with resolve. "Buck Watson thinks strength comes from cruelty, from breaking others down. But real strength is standing here without your veil, trusting me with your truth." She moved to the window, gazing out at the star-strewn sky. "I used to love the stars. Thomas and I would sit outside after James was asleep, naming constellations, making wishes." Her voice grew distant. "Now they just remind me of the sparks from the fire, dancing up into the darkness." Jacob joined her at the window, standing close but not touching. "Maybe it's time to make new memories with them." "Is that what you're offering, Mr. Harlow? New memories?" "Jacob," he corrected gently. "And I'm offering whatever you're willing to accept. Friendship, certainly, a place where you don't have to hide. Beyond that..." He trailed off, uncertain how to voice feelings he barely understood himself. Clara turned to face him, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, her scars seemed to fade, leaving only a woman touched by tragedy but not broken by it. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he counted off on his fingers. "I know you're educated, your speech betrays Eastern schooling. I know you're too proud to beg even when desperate. I know you loved deeply and lost terribly. I know you have the strength to start over in a harsh land that shows no mercy to the weak. And I know that when you smile, really smile, not the polite mask you wear, it's like sunrise after the longest night." "You've seen me smile perhaps once," she protested, but her lips were curving even as she spoke. "Twice now," he said, answering her smile with his own. And I find myself wanting to see it again and again. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. The wager, Watson, will expect you to claim victory or admit defeat. Either way, my reputation will remain intact. Jacob's jaw set with determination. I'll tell Watson the truth that I failed to bed you before dawn. Let him crow about his victory. Those who matter will see the truth that Clara Thornton is under my protection as an honored member of this household. Not as... He couldn't finish the ugly thought. And if he spreads worse rumors, if he claims you're harboring a criminal or worse, then I'll face him down with every resource at my disposal. I didn't build this ranch by backing down from bullies. He paused, then added more quietly, though I'd prefer to win this battle without bloodshed. As you asked. Clara studied him in the dim light, seeing past the successful rancher to the lonely man beneath. You're not what I expected when you bought me at that auction. What did you expect? Another Buck Watson, someone who saw only an opportunity for conquest or profit. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap Maria had provided. Instead, I found someone who understands that some wounds don't show on the surface. We all have our scars, Jacob said, thinking of the years of isolation, the walls he'd built after watching too many dreams die in the harsh Wyoming territory. Yours are just more honest than most. Clara reached up, her fingers ghosting over his cheek in an echo of his earlier gesture. What scarred you? Jacob Harlow, what made you build these walls around your heart? He caught her hand, holding it against his face. That's a long story. We have time, she said simply. If you're truly offering me a home here, we have all the time in the world. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of possibility, of potential futures neither had dared imagine. Jacob pressed his lips to her palm, feeling her pulse flutter beneath the skin. Clara, he began, then stopped, struggling for words. I won't pretend I didn't notice you from that first moment on the platform, but what I feel now, it's not about conquest or possession. It's about... Shh. She placed her free hand over his lips. I know, I feel it too, this strange connection, as if we recognize something in each other. But Jacob, I'm not ready. The wounds are too fresh, the losses too recent. I need time. You'll have it, he promised. All the time you need. I'm a patient man. Clara Thornton, and some things are worth waiting for. She smiled again, that sunrise smile that transformed her face. Thank you for your patience, your protection, but most of all for seeing me as more than my tragedy. And thank you, he replied, for reminding me that isolation isn't strength, and that some risks are worth taking. They stood there in the study as the night deepened around them, two damaged souls who had found in each other a possibility of healing. Outside, the ranch slept peacefully, unaware that in this moment, everything had changed. Come morning, they would face Buck Watson's inevitable retaliation, the town's gossip, and all the challenges of building something real in a land that specialized in destroying dreams. But for now, they had a moment of perfect understanding, a promise of tomorrows that might hold more than mere survival. Clara had removed her veil, revealing not just her scars but her courage, and Jacob had lowered his walls, if only a little, letting in the possibility of something he'd thought lost forever hope. As Clara finally bid him good night and made her way upstairs, Jacob remained at the window, watching the stars wheel overhead. They no longer seemed cold and distant, but full of promise, like sparks rising not from destruction but from the forge of new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, Jacob Harlow was no longer alone in his fortress, and somewhere above, a brave woman prepared to face the world without her veil, protected not by pity or obligation, but by something far more precious, the first stirrings of unexpected love. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jacob Harlow rode into Redemption Creek, his jaw set with grim determination. Word of his arrival must have spread quickly, for by the time he reached the Silver Dollar Saloon, a crowd had gathered. Buck Watson stood at the center, holding court with his usual swagger, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the early hour. "Well, well," Watson called out, his voice carrying across the street. "Here comes the great Jacob Harlow. Come to pay your debt like a man of honor." Jacob dismounted slowly, deliberately, his spurs ringing against the wooden boardwalk. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch, heavy with coins. The crowd pressed closer, eager to witness the humiliation of one of the territory's most powerful men. $300, Jacob said, his voice steady as granite. "As agreed." Watson's grin widened as he took the pouch, making a show of counting the coins. "You hear that? Boys, even Jacob Harlow couldn't melt the Ice Queen's heart. Guess that widow's got standards after all." Laughter rippled through Watson's cronies, ugly and mocking. Jacob stood unmoved, his expression carved from stone. "Tell me, Harlow," Watson continued, emboldened by the crowd's reaction. "What's it like? Paying $300 just to have a woman lock her door against you must sting, especially for a man who's used to getting everything he wants." "Are we finished here?" Jacob asked quietly. "Oh, we're just getting started." Watson stepped closer, his breath sour with alcohol. "See, I've been thinking, a woman who hides her face, who won't even let a man who paid good money for her into her bed, she's hiding something. Something dark." The crowd murmured, some nodding agreement, others looking uncomfortable with the turn of conversation. "Maybe she's wanted somewhere," Watson continued, playing to his audience. "Maybe she's diseased. Hell, maybe she's not even a woman under all those widow's weeds. Point is, you're harboring a danger to this community, Harlow." "The only danger to this community," Jacob said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, "is men who think they can bully and threaten their way through life." Watson's face flushed red. "You calling me a bully?" "I'm calling you what you are, a coward who preys on the vulnerable." Jacob stepped forward, and despite being unarmed, something in his bearing made Watson step back. "Clara Thornton is under my protection. She's taken a position as schoolteacher at the Double H. Anyone who has a problem with that has a problem with me." "Schoolteacher?" Watson laughed, but it sounded forced. "You expect us to let our children near that creature?" The word creature cracked through the air like a whip. Jacob's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, violence hung heavy in the morning air. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a clear voice rang out. "I'd trust my children with her." Everyone turned to see Maria, Jacob's housekeeper, pushing through the crowd. She rarely came to town, and her presence caused a stir. "I've spent time with Mrs. Thornton," Maria continued, her dignity intact despite the stares. "She's educated, refined, and kind, more than I can say for some in this town who judge without knowing." "You'd take the word of a Mexican," Watson began, but Jacob cut him off. "Careful, Buck. Your next words might be your last as a healthy man." The threat hung between them, electric with possibility. Watson's hand twitched toward his gun, but something in Jacob's eyes made him reconsider. Perhaps it was the absolute calm, the certainty of a man who'd faced death before and found it wanting. Sheriff Daniels chose that moment to intervene, pushing through the crowd with the air of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "All right, that's enough. Watson, you got your money. Harlow, you've said your piece. Let's all go about our business." "This isn't over," Watson snarled, but he was already backing away, his bravado dimming without the certainty of violence. "No," Jacob agreed quietly. "It's not." As the crowd dispersed, Jacob noticed Tom Brennan standing near the general store. Having witnessed the entire confrontation, his foreman approached, concern written across his weathered features. That could have gone bad, boss. But it didn't. Jacob swung back into his saddle. And now everyone knows where I stand. Watson won't let this go. His pride's taken too many hits. I'm counting on it. Jacob turned his horse toward home. Better to have the snake in the open where you can see it than hiding in the grass. The ride back to the Double H seemed longer than usual, Jacob's mind turning over the morning's events. He'd publicly declared his protection of Clara, staked his reputation on her character. In the unforgiving social landscape of the frontier, such declarations carried weight and consequences. He found Clara in the small schoolroom Maria had helped her set up in one of the unused buildings. She stood at a makeshift blackboard, writing out the alphabet in elegant script. When she heard his boots on the floor, she turned, and he saw she wore no veil. In the morning light streaming through the windows, her scars were clearly visible, but so was the determined set of her jaw. "I heard what happened in town," she said without preamble. "Maria told me before she left. News travels fast. You shouldn't have confronted Watson, not for me." Jacob removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. Someone needed to stand up to him. It might as well be me. "Because you paid for that right." The words came out sharper than she likely intended. No. He met her gaze steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you deserve to live without fear. Because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because I care what happens to you." Clara set down her chalk, moving closer, in the golden morning light. He could see the mix of emotions playing across her features: gratitude, fear, and something else, something warmer. "You're making enemies for me," she said softly. "Watson won't forgive this humiliation." "I've had enemies before." "Not like this. Not because of a scarred widow who brings nothing but trouble." Jacob reached out, his fingers barely grazing her scarred cheek. "You bring more than you know. Clara, you bring courage to a place that's forgotten what it looks like. You bring dignity to a town that trades in cruelty. You bring—" He stopped, aware he was venturing into dangerous territory. "What?" she whispered. "What do I bring?" "Hope," he said simply. "For the first time in years, you bring me hope." She caught his hand, pressing it against her cheek. "I'm broken, Jacob. The fire took more than my face. It took my capacity to trust, to believe in tomorrow." "Then we'll be broken together," he said. "And maybe, in time, we'll find a way to heal." They stood there in the soft morning light, two damaged souls finding comfort in shared understanding. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythm, cattle lowing, horses neighing, cowboys calling to each other. But inside the small schoolroom, time seemed suspended, holding them in a moment of perfect possibility. Finally, Clara stepped back, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. "The children will be arriving soon for their first lesson. Are you ready?" She touched her scars unconsciously, then dropped her hand. "I suppose we'll find out. Will they be afraid? Do you think—" Children see more clearly than adults sometimes. They'll see a teacher who cares about them. Nothing more. As if summoned by his words, voices approached young Cowboy's children, excited and nervous about the new school. Clara straightened her spine, that familiar pride asserting itself. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for seeing me as more than my scars, for standing up to Watson, for giving me a chance at a new life." "Thank you," Jacob replied, "for reminding me that some things are worth fighting for." He left her there, preparing to face her first students, and walked back toward the main house. The morning's confrontation with Watson would have consequences. He knew, but watching Clara face her fears, seeing her prepare to teach despite the risk of rejection, Jacob felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The war with Buck Watson was far from over, but for the first time, Jacob Harlow had something worth protecting beyond land and cattle. He had found someone who understood the weight of loss, the burden of survival, and the fragile hope of new beginnings. And that, he thought as he heard the first tentative voices of children greeting their new teacher, was worth any price. The news spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire on dry prairie grass. By noon, everyone knew about the morning's confrontation between Jacob Harlow and Buck Watson, in the barber shop, the general store, and most especially in the Silver Dollar Saloon. Tongues wagged with speculation and judgment. Buck Watson held court at his usual table, surrounded by his crew and assorted hangers-on. The whiskey flowed freely, and with each glass, Watson's version of events grew more colorful and his rage more pronounced. "The man's lost his mind," Watson declared, slamming his glass on the scarred wooden table. "Protecting that creature, calling me a coward in front of the whole town. Jacob Harlow's forgotten who runs things around here." "What are you going to do about it, boss?" asked Pete Garrison, one of Watson's most loyal hands. Watson's smile was cold as a winter grave. "Oh, I've got plans for Mr. High and Mighty Harlow, and that widow of his." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Did some checking through the telegraph office. Seems there was a Clara Thornton in Kansas. All right, lost her family in a fire, just like she claims. So she's telling the truth about that part. Maybe." Watson's eyes glittered with malice. "But here's the interesting bit. There were questions about that fire. Some folks wondered if maybe it wasn't as accidental as she claimed. A woman who couldn't pay her debts. Suddenly her husband and son die in a tragic fire, and she inherits the insurance money." The men around the table exchanged meaningful looks. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "You saying she—" Pete couldn't finish the thought. "I'm not saying anything," Watson replied with false innocence. "Just sharing what I heard. Course, if such information were to spread around town, folks might think twice about letting her near their children." Meanwhile, at the Double H Ranch, Clara was finishing her first day of teaching. 6 children sat before her, ranging in age from 7 to 14. They'd been shy at first, stealing glances at her scarred face, but she'd won them over with patience and genuine interest in their learning. "Remember," she said as they prepared to leave, "education is the key that opens every door. Practice your letters, and tomorrow we'll start on simple words." Young Timothy Morgan, the boldest of the group, raised his hand. "Mrs. Thornton, ma'am, my PA says you're brave. Says it takes courage to show your face when folks might stare." Clara's breath caught. "Your father sounds like a wise man. Timothy—" "He also says Mr. Watson is a—" The boy caught himself. "Well, he says Mr. Watson isn't nice." "We don't need to speak ill of others," Clara said gently. "Let's focus on being the best we can be ourselves." After the children left, Clara stood in the empty schoolroom, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and elation. It had been so long since she'd felt useful, since she'd had purpose beyond mere survival. She was tidying up when she heard approaching hoofbeats too many to be Jacob returning from the range. Through the window, she saw 5 riders approaching. Her heart sank as she recognized Pete Garrison in the lead. These were Watson's men, and Jacob was still out with the herd, miles away. Tom Brennan emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. But he was 1 man against 5. Clara watched him position himself between the riders and the main house. "That's far enough, us boys," Tom called out. "State your business." "Just came to deliver a message," Pete said, but his grin was predatory. "Heard Harlow's got himself a new schoolmarm. Wanted to make sure she knows what kind of woman is welcome in Redemption Creek." "And what kind is that?" Clara stepped out of the schoolhouse, her chin high despite the fear coursing through her veins. The men's horses shifted nervously as she appeared. Pete's eyes traveled over her scarred face with deliberate cruelty. "The kind that doesn't hide dark secrets," he said. "The kind that doesn't start mysterious fires that kill their families." The words hit Clara like physical blows. She gripped the door frame to keep from swaying. "That's a lie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it? Pete leaned forward in his saddle. Funny how you inherited just enough insurance money to start over after that tragedy. Convenient, some might say. Get off this land, Tom commanded, raising his rifle. Now. We're going, Pete said, turning his horse. But you might want to ask the widow about the investigation back in Kansas. Ask her why she really ran west. They rode off in a cloud of dust and cruel laughter, leaving Clara standing frozen in the doorway. Tom hurried over, concern creasing his weathered face. Don't pay them no mind, ma'am. Watson's just trying to stir up trouble. But Clara had already turned away, walking unsteadily toward the house. The past she'd tried to outrun had found her, twisted into something monstrous by malicious tongues. She made it to her room before the tears came, great wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. She didn't hear Jacob return, didn't hear Tom's urgent report. The first she knew of his presence was the gentle knock on her door. Clara, may I come in? She wanted to refuse, to hide, but what was the point? The truth, or Watson's version of it, would be all over town by morning. Come, she managed. Jacob entered to find her sitting at the window, her face streaked with tears. He'd never seen her cry before, not even when revealing her scars. The sight of her pain ignited a fury in him that burned cold and dangerous. Tom told me what happened, what they said. Does it matter if it's true or not? Her voice was hollow. Once suspicion takes root, it grows like a weed. I've seen it before. Jacob pulled a chair close, sitting so they were eye level. Then tell me the truth. All of it. Clara met his gaze, seeing no judgment there, only concern. There was an investigation, she admitted. We owed money to the bank, more than Thomas wanted me to know. He'd hidden it, trying to protect me. After the fire, when the insurance came through, the bank manager suggested, implied. She took a shuddering breath. He said it was convenient, the timing, but the sheriff found no evidence of arson. The fire started in our neighbor's field, just as I said. But the rumors had already started. Yes, in a small town, suspicion is as good as proof. People I'd known for years began crossing the street to avoid me. The preacher suggested I might be happier elsewhere. She laughed bitterly. As if happiness were possible after losing everything. Jacob reached out, taking her hands in his. They were ice cold despite the warm evening. I believe you, he said simply. Why? The word came out broken. Why do you believe me when your whole town will think I'm a murderer by morning? Because I know you, Clara Thornton. I've seen your grief. And it's not the guilt of a criminal. It's the sorrow of a woman who lost everything and somehow found the strength to continue living. Watson will destroy you for standing by me. This is worse than harboring a scarred widow. This is Buck Watson showing his true nature. Jacob interrupted. He can't win with honor, so he fights with lies. His jaws set with determination. But he's underestimated something. What? How far I'll go to protect what's mine. The possessive note in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a sensation she'd thought burned away with everything else in that long-ago fire. I'm not yours, she said, but the protest was weak. Aren't you? Jacob's thumb traced circles on her palm. Maybe not in the way Watson thinks, but you're under my protection. Clara, you're part of the Double H now, and I protect my own. Even if it costs you everything, especially then. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Now, wash your face and come down to dinner. Maria's making her famous chile verde, and we have plans to make. Plans. Watson wants a war. He's going to get one. But we'll fight it on our terms, with truth instead of lies. Clara searched his face, finding only resolve. You're either the noblest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both, Jacob admitted with a wry smile. But I'd rather be a fool with integrity than a wise man without it. As Clara composed herself, washing away the evidence of tears, she marveled at the strange turn her life had taken. She'd come to Redemption Creek expecting only survival, selling herself for a roof and meals. Instead, she'd found a man who saw past her scars to the woman beneath, who believed in her innocence when others would condemn, who offered protection not from pity but from something deeper. The war with Buck Watson would escalate now. She knew the accusations would spread, the town would take sides. But for the first time since the fire, Clara didn't feel alone in her battle. She had Jacob Harlow, Tom Brennan, Maria, and even the children who'd accepted her as their teacher. It wasn't the life she'd lost in Kansas. Could never be that. But perhaps in this harsh Wyoming territory where redemption seemed as distant as the stars, she might find something she'd thought impossible a second chance, not just at survival, but at living. As she descended the stairs to join Jacob for dinner, Clara made a decision. Watson could spread his poison, the town could believe the worst, but she would not hide again. She'd faced fire and survived. She could face this too, especially with Jacob Harlow standing beside her. The war was just beginning, but for the first time in 2 years, Clara Thornton was ready to fight for her future rather than simply endure her present. The weeks that followed brought a strange rhythm to life at the Double H Ranch. Despite the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, Clara found herself settling into a routine that felt almost like belonging. Each morning, she taught the ranch children, their eager faces a balm to her wounded spirit. In the afternoons, she helped Maria with household tasks or walked the property with Jacob, learning the ways of the ranch. It was during one of these walks that the first real crisis struck. They were checking the eastern fence line when Tom Brennan came riding hard across the prairie, his face grim. "Boss, we got trouble. Lost 20 head of cattle last night. Looks like they were driven off through a cut in the fence." Jacob's expression hardened. "Watson, can't prove it, but the tracks lead toward Triple W land." Tom shifted in his saddle. "There's more. The water hole at Copper Creek's been fouled. Dead animal thrown in upstream. We'll have to dig a new well or drive the herd 15 miles to water." Clara watched Jacob process this information, saw the way his jaw tightened, the careful control he maintained. This was warfare. Frontier style, not bullets and blood, but a slow strangling of resources. "Double the night watch," Jacob ordered, "and start the men digging that well first thing tomorrow." As Tom rode off, Clara touched Jacob's arm. "This is because of me." "This is because Buck Watson is a small man with a large ego." Jacob's voice was steady, but she could see the strain around his eyes. He'd have found another excuse eventually. They continued their ride in silence, but Clara noticed Jacob scanning the horizon more frequently, his hand never far from his rifle. The easy companionship they developed over the past weeks carried an edge of tension now, an awareness of danger that hadn't been there before. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara made a decision that had been forming for days. She reached up and began removing the pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall freely around her shoulders. It was the first time she'd worn her hair down in company since the fire. Jacob watched, mesmerized, as she finger-combed the long strands. In the firelight, with her hair softening the scars on her face, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "I've been hiding too long," she said quietly. "Behind veils, behind proper hairstyles, behind fear. If Watson wants to destroy me, he'll have to do it while I'm standing in the open." "Clara!" Jacob's voice was rough with emotion. "No." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. Tomorrow. I want to go to town with you. I want to walk down Main Street with my head high. Let them see what they're gossiping about. Let them judge the real woman, not their imagination." "Are you sure the talk has been vicious?" "Watson's made sure of that." "I'm tired of letting fear control me." She met his gaze steadily. "You've shown me that there's strength in facing things head on. It's time I learned that lesson." Jacob moved from his chair to sit beside her on the settee, hesitantly, as if she might bolt. He reached out to touch her hair. The strands slipped through his fingers like silk. "You're the strongest person I know," he said softly. "No," Clara corrected, turning to face him fully. "But I'm learning to be. You're teaching me." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities. Jacob's hand moved from her hair to cup her scarred cheek, and this time Clara didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "Clara," he whispered, and her name on his lips was both question and prayer. She opened her eyes, seeing in his face a longing that matched her own. Slowly, giving her time to retreat, Jacob leaned closer. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and seeking, a promise of patience and understanding. When they parted, Clara's breath was shaky. "I thought I'd never. After Thomas, I didn't think I could." "There's no rush," Jacob assured her. "We have time." But even as he said it, they both heard the lie. Time was a luxury the frontier didn't offer, especially with Buck Watson circling like a vulture. The next morning brought proof of that reality. Clara was preparing for the day's lessons when she noticed the children weren't arriving at their usual time. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 9. Finally, young Timothy Morgan appeared alone, his face red from crying. "Timothy, what's wrong? Where are the others?" The boy scuffed his boots in the dirt. "Their parents won't let them come no more. Ma'am, Mr. Watson told them things. Said you were dangerous." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I see." "My PA says Mr. Watson's a liar." Timothy continued fiercely. "Says you're a good woman and he'll thrash anyone who says different. But the others, their parents are scared." "It's all right. Timothy." Clara managed a smile despite the ache in her chest. "Fear makes people do unfortunate things. Are you still allowed to come?" "Yes, ma'am. Pa said wild horses couldn't keep me from learning my letters." So Clara taught her single student that day, pouring all her energy into the lesson, refusing to let Timothy see how deeply the rejection cut. When Jacob found her after the boy had gone home, she was standing in the empty schoolroom, staring at the unused desks. "I heard," he said simply. "It's starting." Her voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. "Just like in Kansas. First the whispers, then the isolation." "This isn't Kansas." Jacob moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "You're not alone here." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his face. "Why are you doing this? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" "Because somewhere between that auction platform and now, you became essential to me." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. "Because when I see you with your student, when I watch you refuse to hide anymore, when I kiss you, Clara, you make me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible." "Jacob." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I'm falling in love with you. I shouldn't be. It's too soon, too complicated. But I am." "Thank God," he breathed, pulling her closer. "I thought I was the only one going mad." They kissed again, deeper this time, with the desperation of two people who knew their happiness was fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "What do we do now?" Clara asked. "We fight," Jacob said simply. "We live our lives, we ignore the gossip, and we show this town that Buck Watson doesn't control us. And if that's not enough, then we make our own way. This territory's big enough for people who want to live free." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But first, we go to town. Just like you wanted. We face them down together." Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Together. That afternoon, they rode into Redemption Creek side by side. Clara wore her best dress still black, but cut in a more flattering style than her shapeless widow's weeds. Her hair was pinned up properly, but she wore no veil, her scars visible for all to see. The reaction was immediate. People stopped on the boardwalks to stare. Conversations died mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer, and men tipped their hats with uncomfortable politeness. Jacob helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store, his hand lingering on hers in a clear sign of support. They entered together, the bell above the door announcing their arrival with tinny cheer. Mr. Morrison, the proprietor, looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Mr. Harlow, Mrs. Thornton. Good afternoon, Charles, Jacob said pleasantly. Mrs. Thornton needs some teaching supplies. Books, slates, chalk. That is... Morrison glanced around nervously. Perhaps you'd be better served ordering through the catalog. Are you refusing our business? Jacob's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Before Morrison could answer, the door burst open. Buck Watson strode in, flanked by two of his men. His eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as he took in Clara's unveiled face. Well, the murderess shows herself at last. Clara felt Jacob tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle too. Mr. Watson, she said with icy politeness. I see you've been busy spreading lies. How very industrious of you. Watson's face reddened. The truth ain't a lie, woman. How much did you collect on your husband's death enough to start fresh? I'd wager. The only wager here, Clara replied, was the one you lost, $300. Wasn't it? Is that what this is about? A grown man's tantrum over a lost bet. The store had filled with onlookers, drawn by the confrontation. Clara felt their eyes on her, judging, wondering, but she kept her gaze locked on Watson. You've got a sharp tongue for a woman with so much to hide. Watson snarled. And you have a weak character for a man with so much pride? Clara stepped forward, causing Watson to instinctively step back. But please, continue your campaign. Show everyone in Redemption Creek exactly what kind of man you are. One who attacks women because he can't face being bested by Jacob Harlow. Watson's hand moved toward his gun, but Jacob was already there, positioning himself between Clara and danger. Touch that iron and it'll be the last thing you do, Jacob warned, his own hand hovering near his weapon. The tension in the store crackled like lightning about to strike. Then Sheriff Daniels pushed through the crowd, looking harried. That's enough. Everyone calm down before someone does something stupid. He looked between the two men. Watson, Harlow, I won't have gunplay in my town. Then tell Harlow to keep his woman under control. Watson spat. I'm no one's woman to control, Clara said firmly. I'm a free citizen of this territory, and I'll speak my mind as I see fit. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed disapproval at her boldness, but others, particularly among the women, showed a glimmer of admiration. Watson looked around, realizing he was losing the crowd's sympathy. With a snarl, he pushed past Jacob toward the door. This isn't over, he warned. Not by a long shot. After he left, the store remained quiet for a long moment. Then Charlie Morrison cleared his throat. Those teaching supplies, Mrs. Thornton, I'll get them right away. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As they completed their purchases and prepared to leave, several women nodded to Clara tiny gestures of acknowledgement that meant more than grand proclamations. Outside, as Jacob helped her into the wagon, Clara felt the weight of what had just occurred. She'd faced down Buck Watson in public, declared herself a free woman, and refused to cower. There would be consequences. She knew. But for now, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. She felt powerful. The confrontation at the general store had been a victory of sorts. But Buck Watson was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. For days, An uneasy quiet settled over Redemption Creek, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Jacob doubled the watch on the ranch, and Clara noticed he never went anywhere without his rifle. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing hour. It was a Thursday evening when everything came to a head. Clara was in the kitchen helping Maria prepare dinner when they heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Through the window, she saw riders, too many riders, moving too fast for a social call. "Maria, get to the root cellar," Clara ordered, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "What about you, Senora?" "I'll be fine. Go, now." As Maria hurried away, Clara moved to the front parlor where Jacob kept a loaded shotgun above the mantel. She'd just taken it down when Jacob burst through the front door, Tom Brennan at his heels. "Clara, get upstairs and lock yourself in." "No." She checked the shotgun's load with practiced efficiency. "This is my fight too." Before Jacob could argue, the riders reached the house. Buck Watson sat at their head, but it was the man beside him that made Clara's blood run cold. A stranger wearing a deputy's badge and the hard look of a professional gunman. "Harlow," Watson called out. "Come on out. We've got legal business to discuss." Jacob stepped onto the porch, Clara and Tom flanking him. "State your business, Watson." The deputy spoke up, his voice flat and emotionless. "My name's Conway. Deputy U.S. Marshal out of Cheyenne. I'm here investigating allegations of murder and insurance fraud against one Clara Thornton." Clara felt the world tilt, but she forced herself to remain upright. "On whose authority?" "On mine," Conway replied. "Mr. Watson here filed a formal complaint. Says you killed your husband and son for insurance money, then fled Kansas jurisdiction." "That's a lie." Jacob stepped forward. Clara was cleared of any wrongdoing by the Kansas authorities. "Maybe so, maybe not." Conway's hand rested casually on his gun. "Either way, she needs to come with me for questioning. We can do this easy or hard. Harlow, your choice." Clara saw the tension in Jacob's shoulders, the way Tom's hand inched toward his weapon. The situation was seconds from exploding into violence. She couldn't let that happen. Not when blood would be shed on her account. "I'll come," she said quietly. "Clara, no." Jacob turned to her, his eyes blazing. "This is a setup. Watson paid this man to—" "Maybe." She touched his arm gently. "But if we resist, people will die. Good people. I won't have that on my conscience." "Smart woman," Watson smirked, though not smart enough to hide her crimes. Clara handed the shotgun to Tom and walked down the porch steps, her head high. As she passed Watson, she paused. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But all you've done is shown this town your true nature. That will be your undoing." Conway gestured to his horse. "You'll ride with me. Ma'am, no tricks." As Clara mounted the horse, she looked back at Jacob one last time. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. The ride to town was silent except for the clip-clop of hooves and the jingle of spurs. Clara kept her back straight, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She'd survived fire, survived loss, survived the auction block. She would survive this too. But when they reached town, it became clear Watson had planned his theatrical finale carefully. Word had spread, and what seemed like the entire population of Redemption Creek had gathered outside the jail. As Conway helped her dismount, Clara heard the whispers, saw the mix of curiosity and judgment in their faces. Murderous. Burned them alive. Always knew something was wrong with her. Conway led her not to the jail, but to the Silver Dollar Saloon, where tables had been pushed aside to create a makeshift courtroom. Sheriff Daniels sat uncomfortably behind the bar, clearly out of his depth. "This ain't regular," he protested weakly. "Should wait for the circuit judge." "Justice delayed is justice denied," Watson declared, playing to the crowd. The good people of Redemption Creek deserve to know if they're harboring a killer. Clara was placed in a chair facing the crowd. She recognized many faces shopkeepers who'd served her, women she'd nodded to on the street, parents who'd pulled their children from her school. And there, pushing through the crowd, came Jacob, with Tom and several Double H ranch hands behind him. "This is a farce," Jacob declared. "Conway, if that's even your real name, you have no authority here." Conway smiled thinly. "I've got all the authority I need." He pulled out a leather folder. Sworn statements from Kansas. Witnesses who say Mrs. Thornton had motive and opportunity. "Witnesses Watson paid for, you mean?" Jacob shot back. "Prove it," Watson challenged. He turned to the crowd. "Good people, you've heard the whispers. Now hear the truth. Clara Thornton owed money. Lots of it. Her husband's life was insured for a substantial sum. The fire that killed him and her son started inside the house, not in the neighbor's field as she claimed." "That's not true." Clara stood, unable to remain silent. "The fire started outside. The wind that conveniently only burned your property." Watson's voice dripped with false sympathy. "How fortunate that you survived while your family perished." The crowd murmured, some nodding along with Watson's narrative. Clara felt the tide turning against her, just as it had in Kansas. History was repeating itself, orchestrated by a man who couldn't bear to lose. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. "I was there." Everyone turned to see a travel-worn stranger pushing forward. He was older, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much. "Who are you?" Sheriff Daniels asked. "Name's Robert Morrison. I was the fire chief in Grayson, Kansas, 2 years ago. I investigated the Thornton fire personally." Clara gasped, recognizing him now despite the years that had aged him. Watson's face went pale. "You can't just—" Watson started. "Shut your mouth," Morrison commanded with an authority that silenced even Buck Watson. "I've ridden 3 days after getting a telegram about these proceedings. Couldn't stand by and let lies destroy a good woman twice." He faced the crowd. "The fire that killed Thomas and James Thornton started in Matthew Henley's field, just as Mrs. Thornton stated. Henley had been burning brush despite warnings about the drought conditions. Wind carried embers to the Thornton barn. Then the house. Mrs. Thornton nearly died trying to save her family. These scars she bears, they're not marks of guilt. They're proof of a mother's love." "He's lying," Watson sputtered. "You paid him." "I've brought documentation," Morrison continued, pulling papers from his coat. "The official fire report, witness statements taken at the time, even a confession from Henley admitting his negligence. The only crime Clara Thornton committed was surviving when her family didn't." The silence in the saloon was deafening. Clara sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. After all this time, vindication had come from the most unexpected source. Jacob stepped forward. "I think we've heard enough. Sheriff, arrest Buck Watson for conspiracy, bribery, and false imprisonment." "Now wait just a minute." Watson reached for his gun, but Tom Brennan was faster, his rifle centered on Watson's chest. "Don't even think about it," Tom drawled. Watson looked around wildly. Seeing his support evaporating, Conway, the supposed deputy marshal, was already edging toward the door. Watson's own men were backing away, unwilling to draw on the assembled Double H riders. "You haven't won," Watson snarled at Clara. "This town won't forget what you are." "You're right," Clara said, standing slowly. She walked toward him, and the crowd parted before her. They won't forget that I'm a woman who survived tragedy. They won't forget that I came here seeking a new life and found people willing to stand by me. And they won't forget that Buck Watson is a small, petty man who tried to destroy me because his pride was wounded." She turned to face the crowd, her scarred face proud and unashamed. "I am Clara Thornton. I loved my husband and son more than life itself. I bear these scars as proof of that love, and I will not apologize for surviving. Not to Buck Watson or anyone else." A murmur ran through the crowd, and then, from somewhere in the back, someone started clapping. Others joined in slowly at first, then building to thunderous applause. Women who'd shunned her had tears in their eyes. Men who'd whispered behind her back now nodded with respect. Watson broke free and ran, pushing through the crowd and out into the night. Sheriff Daniels made a half-hearted attempt to follow, but nobody really expected him to try very hard. Conway had already vanished, probably halfway to the territory line by now. Jacob reached Clara's side, his arms going around her as her knees finally gave out. She sobbed against his chest, tears of relief, of vindication, of grief for all she'd lost and found again. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." "Thanks to Mr. Morrison." Clara pulled back to look at the fire chief. "How did you know? Why did you come?" Morrison smiled sadly. "I've carried guilt for 2 years, ma'am. Guilt that I couldn't save your family. Guilt that the town turned on you after all you'd suffered. When I got word of what was happening here, I knew I had a chance to make things right." As the crowd dispersed, many stopped to apologize to Clara, to shake her hand or offer quiet words of support. Parents promised their children would return to school. Women invited her to their quilting circles. In one night, she'd gone from pariah to respected member of the community. Later, back at the Double H Ranch, Clara stood once again on the porch, but this time she wasn't alone. Jacob stood beside her, his arm around her waist, while Tom and Maria and the others celebrated inside. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," Jacob turned her to face him. "Now you live, Clara. Not just survive, really live. Teach your students, be part of this community, and maybe," he paused, suddenly uncertain, "maybe consider making this arrangement more permanent." Clara's breath caught. "Jacob Harlow, are you proposing—" "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that a schoolteacher needs a proper home, and a rancher needs someone to keep him from becoming a hermit. Seems like a practical arrangement." "Practical," Clara repeated, but she was smiling through her tears. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Well, that and the fact that I love you more than breath itself." Jacob admitted. "I loved you before tonight, but seeing you stand up in that saloon, facing down your demons and Watson both, Clara, you're magnificent." "I'm scarred," she reminded him, "inside and out." "So am I," he said simply. "Maybe that's why we fit together so well." As Clara lifted her face for his kiss, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here from tragedy to the auction block, from hiding behind a veil to standing proud before an entire town. The West was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it had given her something she'd never expected to find again: home, purpose, and love. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, but the sound no longer seemed lonely. It was just another voice in the vast Wyoming night, part of the wild symphony of a land where second chances were possible, where love could grow in the most unlikely places, and where a scarred widow and a lonely rancher could find in each other the healing they'd never thought possible. The autumn that had brought them together was giving way to winter, but Clara no longer feared the cold. She had warmth enough in Jacob's arms and in the community that had finally accepted her. Buck Watson was gone, his reign of intimidation broken. The Double H Ranch stood strong against the prairie wind, and in its shelter, 2 wounded souls had found their way to wholeness. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on the long drive across your own frontier? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Jacob's journey in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more of these authentic Western stories to life.